the moments that get you into the present moment?
Well, for us, what really was I would say that there's a whole culmination of factors that get us to Occupy Towson. But I think that, to be honest, before we even have like VR Mizzou, we have Matt Heimbach on campus. So Matt Heimbach was a student who was at Towson University who started a white student union that was actually SGA funded at the same time.
So he starts an organization that's called Youth for Western Civilization. And Youth for Western Civilization is the one that is SGA backed and funded. His group smears the campus with racial slurs. And it's at that point that the administration intervenes and says, maybe not, Matt, you can't do that. And then he creates the white student union. So just to clarify.
And that was a little bit before I came on campus, and Rofina was a part of that. She was part of the resistance. She was part of the resistance to the white student union. And what the white student union did on campus was they would do like raids, like they would like go back and forth on campus to make sure that white women were not being attacked by black men. They would do what were some of the other things that they did?
They had patrols.
Yeah, they had the patrolling, and then they would have it was like a national straight celebration day of celebrating straight people. They sold brownies in the union to prove that affirmative action was wrong. So if you were white, you paid like $1. If you were black, you paid 75 or 25 cents. They spoke up against the Muslim students. Actually, during the Muslim Awareness Week, the Black Student Union at that time actually had to go to one of their Juma because they were in fear that the white student union would protest their Juma at that time. So they were racist, homophobic, Islamophobic, they were just all kind of wrong.
And just to give you a sense of the years, it's about
This is
2012. 2012. So not to say that y'all you've been here for a long time, but to be clear, like this is in the recent past, and his most recent claim to fame, Matt Heimbach's recent claim to fame, is that he now attends Trump rallies and fights.
I gotta say, that would not be surprising.
Yeah, there's a whole Vice documentary on the white student union and the struggle that particularly Rofina and some other students were engaged in. But like that kind of sets the background for not only just like institutional racism at Towson University, but I think it also kind of sets the background to like actual instances of racism occurring in that, and then the institution not doing enough to fight against it as well. So then when we get into the situation with Occupy Towson specifically, we start to have we had a kind of like a general rally of students where students got together and shared their feelings and different things they went through of different experiences of racism. And some of these included eggshells being thrown at them. Some of these included racist remarks being said in classrooms and professors not saying anything about it. And on top of that, we also had a professor who went to our school who was a big part of the black student body that did not receive tenure. And that ended up being a huge factor. And also inspiring Occupy Towson. Because on top of that, we had other faculty members who were black who were also not receiving tenure as well. So like all these factors coming together resulted in students coming together to create a list of 12 demands that are oddly familiar with the demands of the past. That almost as if to say nothing has changed.
So with that, let's go back in time for a moment.
When I came to Towson in 1969, fall of 1969, the wonderful things that they had, we did. There was no money for any of the organizations that we had. Many of us were commuter students, and many of us had graduated from community colleges. So one of the problems that we had when we came, and I always tell this story, that kind of started the Black Student Union. One of the problems that we had was there were some students, as well as myself, that was taking some courses called Urban Development, which was a course that started you into city planning. And strangely enough, when we applied to come to Dawson, I went to BJC, which was Baltimore Junior College, which was one of the better junior colleges at the time in the country. We also had some students that were coming in, white students that were coming in from Essex Community College. But the interesting thing was, when we brought our credits to Towson to be accepted, there was a question about accepting our credits. Now, we were A and B students, but the interesting thing was that the same teacher was teaching the same course at Essex with the same syllabus on the same dates. And nobody could figure out what the issue was. So we decided to get some information from State Attorney's Office as well as the Attorney General's Office and have them write a letter to have the school explain why, in this instance, these students weren't being, their grades weren't being accepted. For about 2 weeks, we were in limbo. And I said, well, what happened? Are we going to get in? Did we do well enough? Has everybody got the grades that they need to have to get in? Did they lose our transcripts? What happened? About 2 weeks later, we get this glorious, magical letter that says, all of your grades will be accepted. Now, nobody can explain why it weren't. But that really started the BSU, because when we got here, the students found that there were no clubs or organizations for the black students. There were very few teachers at the time. And one of the things that we discovered was that we were going to have to teach the school what we needed. Because as we told them the things that we needed, that were missing, nobody understood it. Nobody could see it. So we sent letters, as good students were, as good Christian students were. We sent letters, we talked to people, we tried to get them to do the things that we needed to do. We got no answers. So the students decided, well, the only way we're going to get, we watched TV and we saw all of the activity that was going on in all the other universities. Cornell, we saw the activity that was going on in California. She said, well, wait a minute. Maybe what we need to do is go and sit in the office and maybe we can get grants. We got together, a group of students, and we sat in the office. And we talked to the president about it. And in this instance, we didn't have to use guns or anything of the sort. We talked to the president, we explained to him what the situation was. He said, well, let me see if we can work this out. And so we met for several months after that, and we got most of what we wanted. Strangely enough, we got most of what we wanted. There was a gentleman that was teaching Black history at Coppin, who the school hired to come. I think it was Dr. Holson at the time, hired him to come and teach Black history. And so we moved on from there. So interestingly enough, 45 years later, which is about the time that we're dealing with now, these young people are now having to sit in to ask for things that they should be getting without asking. Without
So, it's with that, oh, did you want to say something?
Yeah. Just to like talk about how I got involved, because I'm the youngest one up here. But for me, so I came from a predominantly black community, Prince George's County. So So I didn't really understand what systematic racism was. I wasn't conscious yet, but I remember hearing about the white student union and knowing them like, oh, I might be going to Dawson. This could be interesting. But I still wasn't involved in any movement yet. Like that consciousness for me just wasn't there. But I remember it was my second night here as a freshman. We were walking across the field, I don't know which one it's called, the one to get to West Village. And we walked past a group of white students, and my friend said hi, like, because we were freshmen, just hi. And then we kept walking, and then they yelled out the N-word. And that was my second night here, coming from an all-black community. So I was like, like, you just stepped into something different. And I think I still wasn't involved in the movement yet. I still was just kind of like angry. Didn't know if I could report that. Didn't think anything was going to happen, so let it go. I remember when I first encountered microaggression, it was in my body image T-STEM class because I was upset that we were talking about body image and we weren't talking about like the black woman's body image. So there was no reference to hair and there was no reference to skin tone. So I couldn't relate to that. And so I decided to write my paper on it, and because she didn't agree with me, she asked me to give 10 more sources. So that's when I knew, like, this is what you have to do in order to like prove your experience to someone. And I think it was then where I was like, yeah, no. And that's when I like met John, met Delphina, and I was like, oh, Occupy House. Okay. Really aware of it, you're just kind of like, that's not gonna happen to me. Like you don't really understand that like there is no escaping it just because you came from a middle class Christian black family. Like no.
But Dawson is technically in Dawson.
Yeah.
Baltimore County. Now, Baltimore City might be 3 miles south, but you know, it can make a difference.
But does it really?
Yes, it does. I definitely think that I think.
That wouldn't occur in Baltimore City?
Well, I guess what I'm kind of hinting at and kind of wanted to press against is that because of the nature of the city-county divide here, there really is a very political line. And certainly there are neighborhoods where these kinds of occurrences can happen in Baltimore City, but I do think that it's just worth noting to folks that are not from this area that the city-county line is a real one, and it does make a difference. I mean, in a class that I taught here, I was looking at the Dawson Tower Light from 1968. So I was looking for a mention of MLK's assassination. There's not.
Is that the local paper?
No, it says Dawson University.
School paper.
Yes. And yeah, so there's no mention of the King assassination at all. But it was interesting to, I'll say it this way. Baltimore City, April 5th, 1968, was burning up. The Dawson Tower Light on April 5th, there's no mention of it. I think it's April 26th is the next tower light. There's no mention of it at all. So that city-county divide is a real one.
I have a question. So, as a person between these two generations, and having gone to school in the early 90s, college, I feel like a lot of these issues are recurring. And I'd like to get all of your perspectives on, like, and especially as a woman, with women's rights and with all of the attacks that are happening in our country right now against immigrants, people who are Islamic, black people. Like, it feels like we are at this critical moment in our society. Are there things that you recognize as the same, and are there things that you see as different, and what can we do to kind of move this in a direction that's more positive? Okay.
Well, I think, so Dr. Bynum actually said this and she was talking about the thing is we need to start calling racism. We need to start calling things for what they are, and that's something we've kind of moved from. I think that the current problem, personally, we're having and why it's so difficult, and why so many people are so shocked by the current state of the U.S. in regards to women and race and religion, is because it appears that we're progressive and that we're past that, it's harder to prove that it's still going on, right? So when I was watching this documentary, one of the things that I said was, it was easier for people to get riled up doing those sit-ins and doing those lists of demands because you saw explicit cases of racism. So people were getting lynched, people were getting shot, people were getting burned. The KKK was still around, they are still around, but not as, while right now when we did something like that at Towson University, a lot of people, they see we have a black president. While you're at Towson University, you're a black student, you're in a classroom. We're good, everything is fine. So because black students or black people aren't getting lynched, I mean, it wasn't that. A lot of people think the last lynching happened like in the 1800s. No, it wasn't that long ago. But because we aren't getting lynched and you aren't seeing those images on TV, there's this belief that it's not happening. And so therefore, because we're no longer calling it for what they are, we're going backwards now, right? And so it's just like, today I was at a conference and there were a whole bunch of like CEOs in the room. I mean, some of the biggest corporations, you name it, they were there. And so we had to do this thing where you would partner up and you had 30 seconds to answer very like critical race questions, only 30 seconds. And one of the questions was, I will have hope that we'll get past like racism is. And I was the only one in the room. I was like, when we start calling racism, that's when we'll get past racism. And so I think that's one of the critical pieces that's really people are having a hard time understanding is like, no, this is Islamophobia. Just because, we're not snatching, well, we are snatching hijab, so I can't even say we're not doing that. But just because people aren't watching people physically die doesn't mean that it's not happening.
So can I just add 2 sentences to this? I mean, one of the things that I said earlier is that I thought that the explosion of the Black Lives Matter movement and the anti-police killings, etc., I think is starting to reframe exactly what she's talking about and what you're talking about. So I agree that we're at this kind of moment exactly because you can no longer start talking post-racial U.S. when black men are being, gunned down in the streets. So the reason we have a new opportunity, I just completely agree with what you're saying, but I think we need to figure out how we are in a new moment and how to keep that new moment going. Because I think one of the things that the late 60s offered us, I mean, that's the Stokely Carmichael and, Martin Luther King. I mean, they were changing the whole, it was a sea change to have people like that sort of defining the world in which we live. And we had TV for the first time showing us in the early 60s what was going on to black people in the South. So those two things. But we have another opportunity to name it, to call it out, and to try to fix it. And it's like I don't want to be a Pollyanna about what I think is going to go on in police departments across the country, but every police department is paying attention for the first time in all these years to what they're doing in terms of training. Okay, so it's not like that's going to bring nirvana for any of us, but we have a new dialogue taking place, and I am cautiously optimistic that people like those of us who make movies and who are part of this movement need to keep the dialogue going, and that hopefully it will make a real difference.
I am slightly not as optimistic about the way things are going to go. And the reason why I say this is because, for example, as we said before, I don't actually even believe that things are better in terms of the way that they handle things, the way that they handle violence that happens to black people, or the way that they handle discrimination that occurs to Latino people, or the way that they handle the way that they treat women. I think that in actuality what has occurred is that simply the structures that were creating those violence have changed. So it's not that people are less racist, it's that people have less time to be racist. And that has to do with the fact that we have an economic system that's pushed people towards having to take 2 or 3 jobs. They have no time to lynch Johnny for sleeping with his daughter because of the fact that you have too much time to work. So I think that, for example, one of the difficult things about what's happening at places like, especially at like state schools like Dawson, is that how can we influence other students to get involved in the movement when those students also have 2 or 3 jobs on the side?
Right.
How can we influence students that a Black Studies department is pivotal when those students have to think about what is going to be the net benefit for me after we get out of school? So I mean, to a certain extent, I think that creates a possibility for a coalition politic where you do have other students who are like, oh, what's happening to black students is important to me because we can't even begin to address all these other issues until we figure out the fact that there's a whole lot of debt that is occurring. But at the same time, when we look at issues like economic issues, and then we look at the issues of race, we cannot sit here and say that it's only because of race, and it's only because of economics, especially when the only reason why the violence that occurs in those videos is not happening right now is because you don't have the time to do that violence.
The colleges are having a dilemma. The culturally offensive behaviors that are happening on campuses are caught between the issue of free speech. Are caught between the issues of free speech. So people and students who see the adults bastardizing the, I guess we could call it civility that we used to have, feel comfortable participating in some of the acts that they're participating in. They don't really even understand what they're doing. The administrators' hands are tied because in the past they've been able to say, well, they're just kids, and we got to consider their free speech, and we got to let them do some things, and we're caught in between deciding whether it's a hate crime or it's just a bunch of kids having a good time. But what has happened over the last in 2015 is that the students and women have decided this was wrong. In the old days, we knew wrong from right. It was either right or wrong. Now we have social media, and people, their positions are, well, if I'm not shamed, if there's nobody to shame me for what I'm doing, then I can continue to do it. So that's the dichotomy that we have now in the schools, because the administrators are caught between a rock and a hard place, determining whether we should suspend this organization for treating the others, because that's really what this is about. It's about the others. It's not about the European or not about the Eurocentric aspect. It's about all the others. Women are others. And we're seeing it now play out in our politics. Women are others. Muslims are others. The handicapped are others. You know, everybody is something wrong with everybody. And that's out of order. We're all Americans. We're in the same boat together. And if we don't figure this out, we all go down together. And like they say at the airport, if you see something
As a student observing a Body Black House and movement, there was a lot of incorporation of social media. There were word outlets afterwards. There were a lot of derogatory comments on Periscope and on Yak. And what are your responses to how people take things, and what gives them the audacity to say it?
Personally, I wasn't shocked by any of the comments, right? That we received. And so that's also the sad part of the reality. I remember, I think I had this conversation with John where we were like, we're actually happy that they're doing this because it seems like the only way we can get our administration to believe us is if they do this publicly and we can screenshot it and show it. Those comments on Periscope and Yik Yak and Twitter aren't new. Black students at Towson University hear this all the time. We hear it in classes from students, we hear it from professors, we hear it all the time. But we constantly have to prove that we're hearing it, right? And so the only way we could do so is by them putting it on social media. Now, as a human being, yeah, it hurt. You know, we were in there for 10 hours and we're reading all of these comments, freaking out like what's going on. But I think it once again shows, oftentimes, as Black students, we don't get the attention unless we're physically being harmed. Unless someone is like, we about to shoot up that room, it's just like, oh, First Amendment rights, you know? We can't really do anything, you know, because the way the policies work, we can't really say anything. We, you know, and that's what we constantly get. It's always like, until Black students' lives are physically, until someone says, I am going to do this to you, our administration hands are tied. And it shows the issues that exist. And me and Rhea were, having this conversation of how does the policies work? At what point, as a Black student, can I say, I am harmed, and I am going to be harmed? Does someone have to show up with a gun first for you to take it seriously that something might actually happen to me today, right? And so we screenshot it off. I was like, let me show you, Towson University, why this is an issue, why it still exists here, why this whole shenanigans about diversity and multiculturalism and yada, 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 yada. It ain't, nah. We gonna talk about this today, right? And so, but even with that, we're still struggling to prove it.
What happened? So you showed them the screen, any reason?
Well, I mean, no, because once again, Yik Yak is anonymous, so you can't find, well, if you try hard enough, you can, because there are universities who've actually chosen to search and see who said that, if it was, seen as harmful enough. You can't really say much about Twitter, because once again, a lot of things people said was protected under freedom of speech. There was one comment that was made that we did get the police department involved, because we felt that our lives are at stake. But other than that, outside of social media, even the instances that happen on campus, when it does happen, the policies aren't really put in place to handle it properly. And so that's even an issue to discuss.
Just to feed off what Delphina said, as an activist, you spend more time proving that what you're doing actually needs to be done than actually being able to get the demands met. So we're constantly having to prove that this is a problem. We're constantly having to prove that this affects our mental and emotional well-being, so can you please take it seriously? Just this idea that we feel, as a Black woman, the strong Black stereotype, it's no, this is actually hurting my feelings, and I can't continue to go to this class because this professor's curriculum is so whitewashed. It's making me feel othered. It's making me feel why am I paying this institution all this money and this curriculum does not represent me? So how am I going to utilize it in the world? So it's just until people take that seriously, what will be done really? how many times do I have to personally call out a professor because they have no diversity in the way that they teach before someone says, can you add this to your curriculum? Like, this is a problem. Until our dean of the Women's Studies Department does something, because this is a problem.
Well, I hesitate, I'm not sure I should tell this story, but I know a lot of white some of it is friends are white people. And I was in a situation a few years ago where one of my colleagues, a white male, made the statement that when he looks at people, he doesn't see race. Which I found a little hard to believe. And then not 5 minutes later, oh, actually, I think I burst out laughing at that point. And 5 minutes later, he said nobody could ever accuse him of being a racist, and then he named the only male black tenured professor as one of his best friends. So yeah, and when I tried to bring some of this to the attention of people, I'm made to feel like I'm crazy. So I mean, and it's sort of like, I don't know how to prove it, because I can't really prove it. People will say, well, no, I didn't really say that, or whatever. So I guess I was trying to think about how to frame a question, but I'm inspired by all of you, by the way. And I think you're probably it's just to keep trying to call it out.
I think like that's the only way to keep calling it out and to keep making people aware that their words carry weight, to understand the implications of their words, to correct their use of language. That's number one. Like, if you hear it, correct it. If you hear someone say, you guys, you all, on campus, that takes it to a whole nother level, because now if I call you out, that's 10 times more pressure on me to perform. So I cannot slack in any way academically, because if a professor that does not agree with me catches that, that's it. Like, there is no more. So it's like you're staying up until 4 a.m. with your friends discussing what's the next step for us, and then you also have to make sure that like you get an A on this paper, not because you really care about this class, but because you cannot let this professor have anything to say about you. You cannot give them any room. Like, you have to be excellent, because you chose to say something that they did that was wrong already was wrong, because you chose to challenge them. So it's like, that's the backlash of activism. So it's like, yeah, that's fine. Like, you might win an award and da-da-da-da, but it still hurts a little bit.
Well, can I interject for a moment? The comments that have been said, and there are definitely horror stories back there. It's your list of stories. There's always the one, I won't tell it, but had a student mistake the word Negro for nigger and read it out loud in class. Ask me later. It's an amazing one. But with these stories in mind, the present day stories, the histories as well. There was a question asked in the movie: can predominantly white universities accommodate the needs of Black students and students of color? And it was a question asked in the context of the activism at San Francisco State and Cornell, but it's a question that I am still left wondering in 2016, especially in this moment when the demands are exactly the same. There's still not enough tenured and promoted Black faculty. There's still not enough Black students and students of color represented on campus. The 12% that Dawson University got in 1968 is the 12% that they have present day, and it has not moved, even though Maryland is 33% Black, which is pretty high when it comes to states. So, in short, what I'm wondering is, can universities in 2016 accommodate the needs of Black students and students of color more generally?
Can I just make one comment, because I think the film talks, the film doesn't talk to it directly, but it tries to show it. The reason, initially at least, that some of these movements were successful is because they involved the entire campus. They started with Black demands, but if it had only been a group of 20 Black black students saying, you know, we want more affirmative action and we want a black studies program. And there had not been an ability to kind of really pull everybody else along, or at least the progressive corner of the university along with them, it would not have succeeded. I mean, the thing about Howard concedes nothing without a struggle, never has and never will, that remains true. So the issue of how do you take some of these demands into the broader campus and find your both white and other ethnic group allies to make it so that the president of the university is feeling it from all sides, not just from one side. And so that the isolation, I mean, if the movement at Cornell never would have started if just Jackie Jones, who describes being the only black student in the engineering department, if everybody's experience had just been that and no one had ever come together, nothing would have ever happened. She would have just been crying in her room every day. So the notion of how do you find, you know, larger sort of concentric circles of support on any university campus to continue to make these demands heard and felt and understood both in the context of the campus and in the context of the larger society strikes me, that's what makes it feel so similar. You know, that why today feels so much then is because it's never going to happen if it's just a small little group. You know, because then all the things you describe become your personal burden. You know, and it's like you have, it's like if you're not supported by more than 2 or 3 other people, you can't do it. Because over time, the weight will get you, and you will be beaten down. So I don't know how we play that out, but that's, I think, really what's at stake.
I don't know. There's so much that question in my mind, because it's actually, to me, it's the question that I've been currently asking myself a lot. And I actually been debating with myself if this is actually possible. And I don't know, because of the fact that I think that what ends up happening so I'm gonna actually answer back to that as well. Like, I don't know if in the university space, like if in general, if it's a space that can actually be accommodating for black students. And the reason why I say that is because the university as an institution is also tied to the rest of the world that's not necessarily pro-black. So you can't fix the university in a vacuum. You can't say that oh, this is a space safe for black students, and then still have this university still funding chairs that are tied to prisons. You can't say that the university is a space for black people and then still have the university denying certain students into the university because of the fact that they come from different areas, or not actually promoting the university in certain areas because that's part of Baltimore City and we don't go there. Like, we can't, so like the university doesn't improve itself in a vacuum. And so even in our politics, the short-sightedness, the number one problem with Occupy Towson is that Occupy Towson is about just Towson University. Because we can't fix the university without also fixing the things that the university is contributing to at large. So I don't know, but I also know that we as black students cannot wait for white students to say that they agree with us. Because like, that's the problem. The problem with, I think the crucial problem with coalition politics is that ultimately what it comes down to is first convincing your white peers that this is actually something that's occurring. And then while that's going on, you still have students who are lagging in classes because of the fact that they're still dealing with racism. And while that's going on, you still have students who are getting eggshells thrown at them because they have to deal with the racism just because they want to go out to a party. That we cannot solve the problems here without solving the problems that are happening there. And we cannot have a coalition politic. We cannot have a coalition politic without having to first convince white people that these problems actually exist. So I mean, for me, I'm interested, and I've always been interested in coalition politics because I grew up in a space that was predominantly white, rural, next to really poor white people. Like there's a trailer park right across the street, and like there's always been this dream of mine that one day there could be a possible chance that we both are working along side by side to make sure that we both help our conditions. but there's this gap in experience that I don't think is actually going to be bridged until our humanity, which is so difficult to get through to people, because it's not necessarily just, the race issue is not a problem of like pigment, it's a problem of humanity, and I think that there's just a gap.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is student here actually at Dawson University. I tried to form some question out of this. I'll get there eventually. I just wanted to share this story actually. I'm really glad to be able to be here and watch this documentary that deals with this kind of issue. As a film student, I've worked at a movie theater for the last 3 years actually, so I've really picked up, having watched almost every movie that's come out in the last couple of years. The mainstream films, you really see a trend of, you know, what gets promoted, what gets seen everywhere, and the voices that kind of get shut out. To the extent of, in this past year, back in August of 2015, we saw the release of the film Straight Outta Compton, which the success of that film, I think, is monumental. I actually found out last semester that at the particular movie theater I worked in, I spoke with the general manager who had told me that at one time it was decided that Straight Outta Compton was actually not going to play at that movie theater, and that it had been decided at the last minute that it was going to play because it was basically really popular and it was making a lot of money. And even once they decided it was going to play, they heightened security and they were really scared. I asked him why that happened, and he basically told me, a direct quote, he didn't want a movie playing in the theater that would incite violence. And so I actually ended up, I was infuriated when I found out about that, and I was really vocal about it. There was an article in the Tirelight that was printed last semester that actually addressed that. I got in a lot of trouble because my name was on that. And I basically, the managers actually tried to get me fired, basically, because of me being very vocal about this thing. They were just kind of worried about their reputation. I was more worried about film distribution, certain voices not being heard. So actually, a couple film friends and I have started a student organization on campus. We're very new and we're still pretty small, but Media and Diversity Engagement is what it's called, and we basically just talk about these kinds of issues. You know, and within the film department, actually, a lot of the students, I don't come across on-set direct racism very often, but what I do see is this sort of attitude of, because they don't really see it, it's not really there, or it doesn't really matter as much. We talk a lot about, even within, especially in the film industry, we finally started talking about this with the Oscar So White controversy, but there is this sort of systematic racism even within that industry, sort of keeping that, you know, there are no Black or Latino nominees or minority nominees for Oscars because the opportunities aren't there. And even when they do appear in film, they're slaves or janitors or they own a taco shop, you know. So they don't, and I've found a lot of people that have never talked about this growing up, and they just sort of only see film as like escapism. Let me just escape from the world, you know, forget about my problems and just sit and watch a movie for 2 hours. But I still see that systematic racism in every single film that I see, to some sort of extent. So, my question, I guess, when you're trying to be very vocal about something that really bothers you and passionate about you, you come across a lot of people that, even while they don't outwardly oppose it, they just don't see it as big an issue as it actually is. How do you find a way to sort of get them to understand? Though you can't convince every single person you meet, how do you try to make it more prevalent to them, or more aware of how big an issue it actually is?
So let me just say, I just want to say something about how your question relates to the Oscar So White controversy. If Jada Pinkett Smith and a few other people had not decided to make a really big stink, nobody, I mean, Black people would have noticed they were excluded, Latino and Latina actresses and actors would have noticed, but America at large, absolutely not. And so there's a kind of collusion. You know, everybody wants to get dressed up and do their thing and go and blah, blah, blah. Well, my hat is off to Jada Pinkett Smith for naming it and for calling it out and for making clear that everybody understood only nominees from straight out of Compton were the white writers, which made me even madder. I mean, I was even more infuriated when I saw that. So, I think it's back to understand. Building it. Okay, the point she made, which is like, it's hard to be carrying this friggin' rock on my shoulder all the time, you know, but I'm gonna keep doing it because I sort of have to. Well, I think that's part of what we, so I wanna give you props for having spoken up. And it's like, so maybe you lose that job and you go get another job, whatever. But when, and I don't mean it quite like that, but I feel like what you're hearing from all of us on some level is both the price of speaking up and the cost of not speaking up. And the cost of not speaking up is worse. And maybe part of what's happening is that we are going to continue to affect the national dialogue that we're in here by people continuing to kind of share what they're seeing and share what they're understanding. And so, I mean, again, I feel real, listen, between you and me, it's like, okay, Miss Pollyanna here, the white girl. But I don't really feel like I am. I mean, I feel like I have been waiting for a deeper discussion on race in America for the last 45 years. You know, so I'm actually hopeful, but don't know whether to be optimistic. That's what I would say. So I think it is important that all of us speak up, and that you not have to be the only person in your class when something racist is happening. I mean, let me say, you know, if it was happening and I was there, I probably would speak up, because it's as much my problem as it is your problem to identify it. I don't want to live in a society that's racist. End of story. I mean, kind of that's it for me. So it's like, if you have to take some lumps because you're going to name it and call it out, and maybe you have to challenge somebody, you got to do what you got to do. I think on this issue. I mean, that's what I would say. So we have to keep talking, and we have to keep trying to present images. I mean, if you end up working in film, there are a lot of stories that haven't been told. There are plenty of stories that relate to race that haven't been told. I mean, when we started this, let me just say, we thought it was the untold story of the civil rights movement, because nobody knew anything had ever happened on a campus. It just wasn't known. And look at all the footage that there was in the archives. And we were able to really craft something that sort of puts you back in that time. But nobody knew about it. So I feel like we're all challenged to kind of step up and add our voices, you know, and try to keep working with the big elephant, because it's a big elephant.
Well, thank you all. Sorry. Have a